Welcome to this poetry video where I'll be discussing Sonnet 43, also known as How Do I Love Thee, by Elizabeth Barrett Browning. So first let's read the poem.
How do I love thee? Let me count the ways. I love thee to the depth and breadth and height my soul can reach, when feeling out of sight for the ends of being and ideal grace. I love thee to the level of every day's most quiet need, by sun and candlelight. I love thee freely, as men strive for right. I love thee purely, as they turn from praise. I love thee with the passion put to use in my old griefs and with my childhood's faith. I love thee with a love I seem to lose with my lost saints. I love thee with the breath, smiles, tears of all my life. And if God choose, I shall but love thee better after death.
So there's the poem, read there. Now you've probably already spotted a couple of things. Perhaps you've noticed rhyme scheme, how many syllables, the stress pattern in lines, or the fact that two distinct themes seem to emerge. One of them being love. Obviously, it starts with a piece of hyperphora, this question, how do I love thee, which is immediately answered. And we've got the anaphora, that I love thee, I love thee, I love thee, repeated. And we've also got themes of religion, or a theme of religion that's explored through semantic field. You know, there's a lot of reference to religion, God, saints, faith, praise, passion, grace, all of these words that are linked to religion. Now, before we look at any poem, we should look at context. So, a bit of context for Barrett Browning, Elizabeth Barrett Browning. She was born in 1806 and she died in 1861 at the age of 55. She was very ill. As a child, around the age of 15, she had this spinal and brain problem, which meant she was bedridden and she lived in an excruciating amount of pain. So she was very, very sick throughout her life. And even though she died at 55, this was actually older than the average. Even though she was so sick, she actually lived longer than the average. As I say, she developed this illness at 15, and this was around the same time when she began publishing her poetry. She was addicted to morphine, as I said. She lived in a lot of pain, so she was a drug addict, a morphine addict, to alleviate this pain. And she was very famous in both the UK and the US. Now, Barrett Browning is from England, and so to become famous in the US was a big deal. This was before TVs and the internet, so it was a big deal. She was a bit of a celebrity, and she was a very, very, very religious woman. She was a Christian. She once said, Christ's religion is essentially poetry glorified. So she saw poetry connected to religion. And as I said, she's a very, very religious woman. Finally, she married another famous poet, Robert Browning. Now, Robert Browning in his own right is a famous poet. And he wrote to her as a fan. He wrote, I love your verses with all my heart, dear Miss Barrett. And he praised her fresh, strange music, affluent language, and new exquisite pathos and true new brave thought. So he wrote to her, praising her and admiring her. And they ended up getting married. Now, many believe that Sonnet 43, How Do I Love Thee, is a love poem dedicated to her husband, Robert Browning. I'll leave that up for you to decide. It doesn't actually say that by name. It doesn't say, I love you, Robert. So it's up to you to decide that. Now, I've got the poem here. We can see the form a little bit better. If you haven't counted already, there's 10 syllables per line. It's written in iambic pentameter. So we've got the 5 feet, da-dum, da-dum, da-dum. How do I love thee? Let me count the ways. The rhyme scheme as well is A, B, B, A, B, B, A, C, D, C, D, C, C, D, C, D. So it begins with this 8-line octave and then ends with this 6-line sestet. And I'll talk more about that in a bit once we examine themes and the lines a little bit more. Now, this form of poem, this structure, is known as a Petrarch sonnet. Now, this is Petrarch in the bottom right corner. Obviously, I've added the sunglasses. They weren't around in the 14th century. And as you know, sonnets are often love poems. That's what they are. It's love poetry. So sonnets often explore themes of love. Now, the Petrarch sonnet doesn't begin with Petrarch in the 14th century. It's older than that. It's from the 13th century. But Petrarch makes it popular in the 14th century. As I said, Petrarch Sonnet is 14 lines long. It's 2 parts. It's an octave, 8 lines, and a sestet, 6 lines. And the rhyme scheme is ABBA, ABBA, CDE, CDE. So when you see this form, this structure, written in iambic pentameter, this is what we call a Petrarchan sonnet. Now, basically, Petrarch's this priest, right? And one day a woman called Laura walks into the church. And he quits the church and he writes over 300 of these types of sonnets dedicated to this girl, Laura. It's unrequited love. He loves her, she doesn't love him. So there's over 300 of these sonnets. And this is what really popularizes the form. This is why we now call it a Petrarchan sonnet. As I say, they're love poems that explore themes of love, and Barrett Browning writes in this form. She writes a Petrarchan sonnet. Now, the Sonnet 43 comes from Sonnets from the Portuguese. This is a book of poems published by Elizabeth and her husband Robert. Now, she wrote 44 private sonnets to her husband before getting married. So they're these pure sort of love poems dedicated to her husband. And she'd written 44. And he said, these are the best poems I've ever heard. They're better than Shakespeare. They're as good as Shakespeare. You need to publish these poems. But obviously, they're quite private. She doesn't want to do this. She decides not to publish them, at least with her own name. So she publishes them anonymously. And what she does is she said, I found these sonnets. I found these foreign sonnets and I've translated them. And here you are. Now, apparently, Robert Browning's nickname to Elizabeth was My Little Portuguese. And so it's a bit of a nod saying that they found these Portuguese sonnets and translated them. It's a bit of a nod to their nickname. And there we go. So that's where the sonnet comes from. It's a published book called Sonnets from the Portuguese. Elizabeth wrote all of them, all 44, but she said that she found them and translated them, and they're not hers because she was a bit embarrassed at how private they were. So let's break the sonnet down. We begin with the first line. How do I love thee? Let me count the ways. Well, hyperphora. The speaker lays out the theme of the poem immediately, asking this question. Now, the tone is almost defensive here. It's like someone asked her, how do you love me? She's like, what? How do I love you? Well, let me tell you. Let me count the ways. And the fact that she has to count infers that there are many reasons. Now, as I said, whilst the tone of the question is defensive, like she's being accused, the new tone, the tone found in this next part, let me count the ways, is exciting and passionate. She's not defensive anymore. She's like, how do I love thee? Well, let me tell you, there's so many reasons why I love you. Now, I want you to ask yourself, who's asking, how do you love me? And who is she responding to by saying, let me count the ways? Is it her husband, as many believe, or is it perhaps God? Now, there's no direct or explicit mention of who, so it's up to you to interpret who you think she's talking to. We move on then. I love thee. We have the anaphora. This is repeating. We've also got to the depth and breadth and height. We can see assonance and consonants. There's the the depth and breadth. We've got the consonants, the th and th repeated twice. So these are light, breathy sounds, both of them, and they create an uplifting mood. Breath is an important idea in the poem, so keep an eye out for that. But it's so light that it's almost as if the love allows her to fly. We've also got polysyndeton. The repeated and creates a feeling of excess. There's so many reasons to love. And we've got a spatial metaphor. Now, this is really weird. If you think a bit, depth and breadth and height, it's basically 3D. How deep, how wide, and how tall something is. These are very concrete ways in which to measure something. But it's measuring the abstract. It's measuring love. And if you read on to the next line, the depth and breadth and height my soul can reach. The soul is also very abstract. So this spatial metaphor uses the concrete of the 3 dimensions and the abstract. And this shows how infinite her love is. As I say, we've also got the anaphora. This is repeated, it develops the theme, it creates a natural rhythm, but we immediately know what the poem is about. So moving on then, we've got my soul can reach, as I said, I love thee to the depth and breadth and height my soul can reach when feeling out of sight. So we've got personification, the soul reaching up. It almost seems infinite, and it develops themes of religion as well. We've got here soul, being, and ideal grace. All of these words have religious undertones. We've also got out of sight. I interpret this as the spiritual realm. So the feelings are out of reach. They're like they're in heaven. And then, as I said before, we've got allusions to heaven, God, and the spiritual realm, an important theme in the poem. I've also got here, for the ends of being after death, the end of when you die, the end of when you be something. But given that it's a capital B, it could be the ends of the universe, the ends of God. So again, it says that her love is infinite. And then ideal grace, another religious reference. I want you to really question, is Browning responding to God, or is she just using religion as a metaphor, as a measurement for her love towards her husband? So moving on, the next 4 lines of the octave, we've got anaphora, I love thee, I love thee, I love thee, repeated 3 times. And we've also got some more assonance. We've got the E sound is repeated. So we've got I love thee to the level of every day's most quiet need. So it actually extends into the next line. So while the previous 4 lines of the octave are very abstract, they're about the soul and infinite, like out of sight, being and heaven, basically. These 4 lines bring everything down. They're very concrete. The heavenly in the previous 4 lines is juxtaposed with the ordinary. So I love thee to the level of every day's most quiet need. It's basically, I love you from heaven in the previous 4 lines to I love you from the most mundane, ordinary tasks that I would do every day. So these 4 lines really juxtapose the previous 4 lines. As I say, every day's most quiet need, the simple things in life. It returns from the grandness of the soul reaching high to the ordinary. Also, I do want to talk about a poetic term called enjambment. If you look here, I love thee to the level of every day's most quiet need. This is one sentence or one clause split over 2 lines. So whenever you see this in poetry, whenever you see a sentence that doesn't finish in one line but extends to the next, so where the line before, it's not a full, complete sentence, it actually extends into the next line. This is known as enjambment, okay? Then we've got as well the metaphor for day and night by sun and candlelight. We've got the heavenly sun and the ordinary candle. Again, we've got this juxtaposition of the heavenly, the soul, and God to the ordinary, everyday stuff like candles. Also light imagery, it's often, we need to remember that light defeats darkness. It's a good thing. So we've got I love thee freely. Again, we've got more assonance of the E sound. There's lots and lots and lots of this in the poem. The repeated long E creates a natural rhythm and makes the love feel long and endless, just like the sound. And then we've got as men strive for right. So the love is compared through the use of a simile to men trying to do what is right. So as men who do this are noble, the love is therefore noble. Again, is she talking to God or the husband? It's up to you to decide this. But the simile is saying her love is noble. And we've got I love thee purely as they turn from praise. So we've got alliteration, which will extend into the next line, of the P sound, the p. The purity of the speaker's love. And as they turn from praise, so the simile compares love of men who turn from praise, basically those who are humble, they're not seeking praise. So she's saying her love is pure. Again, religious elements, purity, praise, and humility. As I said, the continued alliteration, we've got the passion put to use. So we had the p in the previous line, we've got p again. So there's a lot of endless sounds here, the repeated E, the assonance throughout, this p sound that's repeated. It just feels endless. So I love thee with passion put to use in my old griefs. So I've written here, old griefs could refer to our old injuries. Remember, As I said before, she had spinal and head injuries, she was bedridden, she was in a lot of pain, she couldn't walk, and the intense negative feelings from those grief are put to use positively for love. She loves just as passionately as her pain was passionate. Now, it's also important to note here that passion, the original meaning of passion, actually means to suffer. So if you think about it in that terms, with the suffering put to use in my old griefs, it makes more sense then. So like I say, in Greek, passion originally meant to suffer. With my childhood faith, again, as I said, the woman's very, very religious, and there are these religious undertones throughout. I love thee with a love I seem to lose with my lost saints. So she's saying here, I love you with a culmination of all the love I have felt for lost saints. Now, lost saints, I would say, is a metaphor for those in her life who have died. So we can see that there. Next, we've got, I love thee with the breadth, smiles, tears of all my life, and if God choose, I shall but love thee better after death. So we've got a poetic device here known as Cezura. There's lots of breaks. You see the commas, the breaks in breath in meter that are linked to breathlessness as a result of her love. She's so in love that she's breathless because of it. And these breaks, these pauses that you find in the meter, they're known as Cezura. Also note the juxtaposition. There's a lot of juxtaposition in the poem, but we've got smiles and tears, again, for better or for worse. I love thee for better or for worse. And then we finish, if God choose, I shall but love thee better after death. So there's possible link to her illness here. She faces death in an accepting way. She doesn't feel like she has much agency with her death here. She leaves everything up to God. And it says that even in heaven, she would love this person even more. That's what the last line means. Again, is she talking to her husband? Is she talking to God? It's up to you to decide. But I've broken the poem down again here. We can see the octave. When we start looking at themes, we notice that the first 8 lines really explore the holy and the spiritual to the mundane and the ordinary. We've got the soul, grace, heaven, ideas such as this, moving to everyday's most quiet need, the ordinary things, the candles. And then when we look at the sestet, the last 6 line, we really shift the tone. We've got a lot of pain, we've got death, we've got loss, we've got her childhood and the grief she had to deal with. And then it finishes with this idea of death, even though it is accepting. So the tone does shift somewhat. Anyway, that's the poem. I hope that's enough for you to go ahead and analyse and finish your analysis tables. Good luck. Thank you.